Most drummers out there start out with a standard felt bass drum beater, sometimes a plastic or a two-sided one, but what if we want to explore the real breadth and possibility of articulation and also tone without buying a bunch of beaters? I know for me, my first pedal just had a round felt beater on it, which did me just fine, but after a while, I started getting interested in other things. I tried out lamb wool beaters, I tried out wooden ones. There's a lot that you can buy out there on the market. But before we go down to the store and spend alarming amounts of money on beaters, there are a few things we can do at home to see what we can get out of our drum without going to all of that trouble. When we think about bass drum sounds, generally speaking, we consider the attack, we consider how much tone it has, maybe how boomy it is, and the beater choice, or what you do to that beater, can influence this pretty dramatically. Today's experiments will be relatively subtle tonally, but there's a huge feel difference that goes along with all of these. So as you experiment with them at home, you're going to discover just how dramatically different the playing experience is in addition to the sound change. First up is a trick that I saw on the internet by Colin Bailey, which is shaving a flat spot onto one side of your felt beater so that you get a flat attack surface when you strike the drum. Today, rather than cutting it with a saw or something like that, we chose to use sandpaper and just sand away on one side of it until we ended up with a flat surface. Depending on the grade of sandpaper you use, this will take a little bit of time or maybe a whole lot of time, but either way, as long as you're judicious about staying flat to the area that you're sanding, you should have no trouble with this, and it only takes a few minutes. Additionally, since we're not doing anything to the other side of the beater, we still have our old surface to use if you do this to your beater and decide that it's not for you. All right, let's listen to what this sounds like, bearing in mind that this particular one is a little bit less about a dramatic sound change, which is why we're not doing a specific comparison, and more about how much more powerful the attack feels from the drummer's perspective. Now this one isn't a major surprise. There are flat-sided beaters on the market that you can buy. However, now we have a two-sided beater that gets us two different feels, and depending on your tuning scheme, possibly a dramatic difference in sound. By sanding in this flat surface, we're also distributing the energy of the attack to a larger surface area on the head, which, if we are running into situations on our drums where our beater is striking at a little bit of an angle to the batter head and not perfectly flat, may save the life of our bass drum head and make it last a little bit longer, similarly to striking a drum with a drumstick flatly to the head as opposed to a steep angle. If rather than hacking away at your current beater, you'd like to just own something that gives you a similar response, Danmar, which is the maker of the one that we cut today, also makes a square beater like this, which is flat on all four sides. This is hip because you get 4 chances to wear out the beater before it's totally shot, but this again is a thing you have to go buy. It costs money, less of a hack and more of just another purchase. Additionally, with this, you can't change the angle without going in there and similarly sanding it as we did. And I have noticed using this at home that it is definitely contacting much more at the top of the beater than across the full surface, depending on which drum I'm using, because of the depth of the hoops and other factors. This does mean that if you do want to take a square beater and start to carve angles into it, you could actually have different sides for different drums, depending on those factors that might make it strike at a different angle. If you're enjoying what you're seeing today and you love these kinds of hack-oriented videos, please follow the link below to the Patreon. It is the very best way to help us continue to do experiments like this, give you new content. There's a great community over there. Check it out. Next up, we're going to do a yarned over beater, similar to a marimba mallet. And for this, Ben's going to show you how he did it.
Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a fun one. This is a trip back to high school for me. This is where I first learned to wrap mallets. And what we're essentially going to do is make one of these things right here. And the idea is we're taking a regular bass drum beater. You can take, I recommend probably the smallest one that you can find, or you can shave down something similar to one of our other hacks here, and use that as the core of this mallet bass drum beater. So what we're going to do is take this beater and we're going to take this yarn and we're actually going to wrap a mallet around it. And this is actually a lot simpler than it sounds. For those of you who want a really detailed tutorial on this process, over on our Patreon later on this week, we're going to have a full step-by-step, both video and photo version of this that goes into all the subtlety and nuance. So if you have any questions, chances are it's answered over there. So to start off, what we're going to do is take the beater that we're using as the core here and a little bit of yarn. This is just like simple budget bargain basement craft yarn, got it at a local store. And we're going to just tie a little bit of a knot around the shaft of the beater, and that's just below the beater head. And that's just to kind of start things off. And then all we're doing from here is actually just wrapping over the top, not directly over the top, but a little bit of it at an angle. And then we're slowly rotating the beater around. You're not looking for full coverage from the very beginning. You should have something that looks kind of like this, where you're getting like a little bit of like a spider web kind of thing going on. You're slowly rotating around. And as you get through this entire surface here, eventually you end up with a little bit of a crown at the top. And that'll look like this right here, where you've got kind of this overlapping ridge line here. And so ultimately what you do is once you finish getting coverage all the way around the beater head, you're going to take a, I recommend the largest knitting needle you can find, or largest, it's a pretty standard needle, but the idea is you want something that you can put yarn through. And then you're just taking the end of the yarn and sewing off the top here. So just going through and manually just doing loops around that and sewing it off on the top so that it doesn't come loose. Then you're going down to the bottom, doing a couple times around the bottom there, and before you know it, you've got one of these. It takes all of about 5 minutes once you've done this a couple times to do something like this. And it's a lot of fun. And you can make your own mallets this way. Maybe we'll get into this a little bit more in the future. It's a really simple process. And while this sort of thing is often automated when you go to some of the major mallet and drumstick manufacturers out there, it's fun to be able to do this on your own. You can use all different types of yarn. You can experiment with that. You can get down to experimentation with how much tension you're placing on the yarn as you're wrapping it. It can actually be a lot of fun if you want to nerd out to the degree that we have here.
Now, let's hear how this sounds on the drum. We've modified the muffling a little bit so that there's a little more tone in the drum, because that's going to exhibit the factors that this adds for us much more so than a heavily muffled drum. This one is super fun and something that I never thought of. When Ben told me he was going to do a yarn beater, I honestly had no idea what he was going to do. And I showed up and had this huge marimba mallet looking thing, and I was just so excited to try it out. It feels fantastic, and it feels like playing through the head. It reminds me of the sensation of playing a concert bass drum in orchestra and using a giant mallet to hit it like that. Extremely fun, very inspirational. Also, more for grooves where there's more space. I wouldn't use something like this for a dense or super syncopated groove, but more for one where I want a lot of character and tone out of the bass drum, likely a little less muffling and being judicious with my rhythms. In that this setup for this beater is very reminiscent of large gong or bass drum mallets, it stands to reason that this is going to get us the best effect out of larger drums and, again, more open tunings. So save this one for situations where you want to really make a big bass drum bloom. And, if you even want to go so far as to having it sound classical like that, it's right in there. Finally, something I've been super excited to show here because it is something that I use in my daily life, using a microphone windscreen on a standard felt beater to simulate a wool beater. Let's hear a demo of this beater without and with. This is great fun because it is actually a fairly significant difference between having it on there and not having it on there. And additionally, these windscreens are very affordable. They're available on the internet for just a few dollars, and they weigh nothing. They don't add anything to your bag. They're a fraction of the cost of another beater. And you can't get faster than that. It's like swapping out sticks for brushes, which is actually when I do this the most. If I'm in a playing situation where I need articulation and I'm playing with sticks, and then I move to brushes or mallets and I want the bass drum's character to change as well, I don't retune it. I just put one of these on the beater, and it takes us right to that kind of feeling instantly. Another great thing about this is if you find yourself in a room with your drums or a backline kit and you feel like the character of the bass drum is too bright, too loud, too aggressive for that particular band or that particular room, this completely flips the script on that. It's great for if you have a restaurant gig, if you're playing in a space that has a lot of brick or glass and is super reflective, just takes all those highs right out and gives you just the bass part of the bass drum. On the other hand, you can also hit pretty hard with this if you need to get a powerful sound. It's not going to have a ton of bright, high-end, or clicky attack in it, but this isn't ruining our ability to surprise people with how much sound comes out of the bass drum. And I do use this on muffled bass drums as well as wide-open ones. Still gets me a great feel and overall changes what I'm inspired to play. Hopefully you found these hacks as inspiring as we did today. They're a lot of fun, again, extremely inexpensive, little arts and craftsy at times, which we love around here, but ultimately right down the middle of DIY, getting us something we can use in real life and showing us new ways to enjoy the same drums that we've been playing all day.